The bells of Mission San Jose bled their soft iron into the late afternoon, while my daughter glowed beneath them lily-white and trembling a veil of lace draped over hair. I used to braid with coins of patience. In the mirror that leaned against the adobe wall, Clara's eyes found mine, and I shaped my aching mouth into approval. I smoothed the veil's edge, the way I had smoothed every rough thing in her life. Past the arch, Mateo's voice drifted low to a groomsman meant to be private, as so many small cruelties are saying the old woman would ruin everything. And why did she insist on being here? Years of thrift and late shifts and needle-pricked fingers collapsed into that sentence. I kept my hand steady because a mother's steadiness is the last rope across a river. I had held a family together through the long echo after my husband Rafael went into the ground at San Fernando, the government pension landing with a thin thud in my account each month. $2,000, and I learned to make it carry $4,000 worth of living. $800 went to Clara the moment the deposit arrived. My remaining $12 paid for rent, light bus fares, and tortillas that outlasted bread. When tuition bills bit, I mended neighbors' cuffs until dawn, the machine's hum turning into prayer. A cashier's check for her apartment down payment had felt like cutting another slice of myself and plating it with pride. When Mateo lost his job and needed recertification, I opened what little I called savings and called it investment in their future. I wrote those choices down in a ledger no one else would ever read, columns of dollars, traded for chances, lines of hours spent so she could climb. The mission candles smoked, and the tiles ran cold under my shoes, and still I smiled, because Clara needed a mother, not a witness. The procession assembled. A photographer chirped. My lips met my daughter's cheek, and I stepped back into the shadow of arches that remembered vows better than men do. The insult lay inside me like a small stone, nothing to stop a heart, just enough to tilt it. I carried that stone through toasts and confetti to the dance where Mateo's hand performed devotion for relatives who liked easy stories, to the clink of glasses raised by people who didn't know what a woman costs herself to make a ceremony appear effortless. When the first Sunday after the wedding arrived, I browned beef and let onions soften until the house remembered warmth. Habit took my hand. Grief loosened its grip. Clara and Mateo burst in laughing like new coins. He nodded at me as at a server who would carry plates to his hunger. The pot simmered. The tortillas puffed. Something inside me did not. I turned off the stove and wiped my hands and told them they could buy food on the way home. It seemed a small sentence in a quiet room, but my God, the way silence changed shape after it. The clock ticked. Their mouths made the round O of people who assume your labor is a subscription that never ends. I hung my apron on its nail as if it were a medal. My pulse stuttered and then steadied. That night, I lay in the narrow bed that had known both love and complaint, and I watched the ceiling turn from gray to nothing. When dawn broke, I brewed coffee the way I like it, sweet enough to shock, and opened the banking app where polite theft hides in scheduled transfers. There, a $5,000 gift set to leave at sunrise for Paris. My thumb canceled it. Under authorized users, I found the names I had once typed with trembling pride and froze the cards that had been for emergencies and had become what emergencies always become when you train people to ignore you lifestyle. The confirmations landed in a string, small green check marks like a flock turning midair. For years, I had confused generosity with love and love with proof. That morning, I recognized love in the way my hand did not shake. Type continued to receive the next part. At the airport, a clerk's frown cracked Mateo's charm, and Clara's face flushed the color of the roses she carried down the nave. Somewhere in the line behind them, someone sighed. Travel likes compliance, not scenes. While they argued with a woman who did not design their consequences, I poured another cup and watched light gather across the geranium leaves I keep in jars along the sill. The house was so quiet, I could hear cicadas warming their instruments. I rinsed the pot and set it upside down, and decided the next thing a woman does, after she tells the first truth, she gathers the papers that tell the rest. At the courthouse, the marble kept its own chill. The clerk slid a copy of the deed across to me without ceremony. In the owner line, a name mine, not theirs. A second request brought the car title modest sedan Mateo bragged about to cousins, as if swagger could sign loans my name again. I thought of the small box of keys I had kept for years more from instinct than plan, the spare to the apartment, to the car, to a storage unit Clara forgot existed. When I lifted their cool weight and let them ring across my palm, I heard another voice, not Mateo's this time, but Don Miguel's, Raphael's old Union brother, who placed his rough hand on my shoulder by the grave and said, "Never sign away what you need to stand up. Sometimes love asks for it, but you will be the one on the floor." I had believed him then and forgotten him slowly. Now his warning returned not as fear, but as spine. I wrote a note and left it on the kitchen table for the day when their knocking turned into pounding. Respect is the rent you never paid. I folded it in half and tucked the second copy with the deeds. By dawn, I had packed a small suitcase, 2 dresses, a sweater that forgave old radiators, the sewing kit that knows my handwriting, and locked my front door from the outside, like a woman who intends to return to a place that will no longer be an altar to anyone else's appetite. At the Greyhound window, I said Austin in a voice that did not second guess. The bus shouldered I-35 while the sky pinked. My phone began its ugly dance calls, messages, alerts, worry wearing costumes, blame rehearsing its lines. I powered it down, and the hush that fell inside me felt like a church with no priest in it, only a woman who had learned how to kneel and was learning how to stand. At a roadside diner, I ordered 2 eggs bacon with courage and a biscuit so drenched in honey, the plate became a gloss, and I ate as if no one were counting. Carmen met me at the station with hair silvered and laughter warm. She didn't ask why. Sisters know the shape of your silence. In her kitchen near Zilker, we drank coffee dusted with cinnamon and let cicadas tell us the time. I told her the whole story in one straight line, the mission, the whisper, the canceled transfer, the cards now colder than the marble where I freed my name, the keys, the note. She pressed my hands and said I hadn't vanished, I had arrived. That night, I slept without waking to decide who would be fed by the numbers I juggled. In the morning, the quilt held light as if it were a child, and I had in fact been one for the first time in years. Type continued to receive the next part. Back in San Antonio, silence did what speeches never do it taught. The rent notice glared bright orange on Clara's door. Shame is a color you cannot paint over quickly. The landlord, kind in his way, believed promises for a week. The bank did not, and the sedan went away on a flatbed a little after midnight, while Mateo's jaw set at the window. At the parish, tongues clacked louder than the bells. In the break room at the clinic, one nurse asked if Clara had enjoyed Europe, and another bent her head with a sympathy too sharp to be kindness. Mateo pawned the watch that glinted at the reception and came home with a plastic bag of groceries that did not make a meal. They called, of course. Even people who have spent your surplus like a birthright dial when water touches their throats. For 2 weeks my phone stayed dark on Carmen's dresser. I walked Lady Bird in the mornings, the path breathing cedar and river joggers swishing past with the friendliness of a city that minds its business and still nods. We counted turtles in a cove and bats at twilight, Carmen and I, and the rhythm in my legs matched the cadence in my chest, slow, steady, not buying anyone a ticket. Eventually, I turned the phone on because boundary is not the same as banishment. Messages stacked themselves. I read none. Instead, I sat at Carmen's desk. and wrote what I should have written before Raphael's heart stopped terms. The letter began the way a stitch begins, small and exact. If you want me in your life, it will be by invitation and not expectation. No automatic transfers from my pension. No cards in your names. You may visit when I ask. Respect will be shown in words and deeds. Apologies will be paid in proof. Without these, there will be no relationship. I mailed it and went for a long walk in the noon heat, letting the sun insist on itself. When the call came that evening, Clara's voice had the rasp grief leaves behind. She circled the rules, like a person hoping a fence will move if she praises it. Mateo's voice rose in the background with curses that have always sounded like children knocking over dishes to be noticed. I repeated the sentences I had written as calmly as a recipe. Carmen watched me hang up, and the nod she gave was a benediction. What happened next did not arrive as a movie does with a single bright scene to make everything make sense. It arrived as dinner burned a little at the edges, as a voice lowered in the second sentence, as a hand that had only gestured finally lifted something heavy. Clara invited me to her apartment a week later. The table wore mismatched plates and 2 candles that tried their best. She asked how I was first, and the question startled me more than any rage had. The stew was simple. My smile was not. After we ate, she pressed a bus pass into my hand paid for from her own hours, silly gift given like a child handing a parent a seashell they believe contains an ocean. I kept it because intention needs a place to live. On a hot Saturday, hammering sounded outside my bungalow. I stepped onto the porch and found Mateo in an undershirt sun punishing his pride as he replaced the fence he had always assumed would hold itself up. He said he owed me more than words. He kept his eyes on the boards, and the swing of the hammer said what his mouth should have for a year. I did not clap. I brought him water, and I did not tell him he was forgiven. Work is a sentence you serve without audience. When the fence stood straight, he put the hammer down, the way a man lays something at an altar. That was the first time I believed change might come to my door, not as a poem, but as proof. Type, continue to receive the next part. Peace returned the way a stray cat does, testing the air and the distance. With money no longer siphoned into a hole I had learned to call love, I scheduled appointments I had deferred under the lie that I was too busy to be the body I live in. Blood work, bone density eyes that have sewn other people's hems for 100 small midnights. I bought a new sewing machine built to hum, not grind, and I threaded it for pleasure instead of penance. Carmen proposed a short trip to Fredericksburg to walk the Wildflower Trail, and I paid for the motel without calculating the sound of the register against next month's light bill. We walked among bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush, and I understood that beauty is not a reward, only a right. You forget when you are useful. Clara began coming on Wednesdays, not because the calendar owed me a visit, but because she did. She brought groceries she bought with her own card receipts, folded the way pride does when it wants to be seen without being loud. She told me small stories about patience and bus routes and the woman at checkout who remembers everybody's name. She did not cry in my kitchen. She did not ask for help. She asked for recipes. I taught her how to listen for when the tortilla is ready to flip by, the way it blisters how to season beans with both salt and patience. She washed the dishes without being told. Sometimes Mateo came, and sometimes he did not. But when he did, he knocked and waited. And when he spoke, he aimed his words at eye level, not down. He fixed what he broke, and then he fixed what time broke. He did not apologize every week. He showed up. The old fence held through a storm, and I found myself on the porch touching the grain as if it were a child's forehead checking the fever that wasn't there. Inside above my desk, I hung framed copies of the deed and title, not as trophies, but as reminders. They used to feel like armor. Now they read like a kept promise to myself. The note I had left on the table after the mission The one about respect and rent stayed folded in the drawer below. Not because I needed to read it, but because words that once saved you deserve clean linen. With Friday's pension deposit untouched by anyone else's plans, I bought fabric I did not need and made things no one had asked for, napkins edged in red, a dress with pockets that widened the day, pillowcases stitched with little blue flowers, like the ones on the trail. I mailed Carmen a ridiculous apron with sunflowers the size of plates. She called me her foolish sister and wore it every time she cooked. San Antonio did what cities do when a story turns, it moved on. The parish gossips found a new mouth to practice on. The neighbor, who had once watched me carry bags bigger than my hips, now waved from her stoop and asked for my recipe for arroz con leche. The landlord sent me a letter acknowledging the rent had been paid on time for 3 months straight signature, a little astonished. One afternoon, a card arrived in mail with no return address. Inside a single sentence in Mateo's careful print, "Thank you for teaching me the price of easy." I set it under the magnet shaped like a chili and did not text back. Carmen and I started a habit of evening coffee on my porch. We counted bats sometimes, and sometimes we didn't. We watched roses lean their red across the fence Mateo had set straight. In the quiet, I found a question rising I had not allowed myself to speak. What will I never again let anyone steal? I wrote the answers, not as a threat, but as a map. My time, my sleep, my small joys, the names I use for myself, the money I earn the right to open my door only when I want to, and the unremarkable holy pleasure of eating a meal slowly, with both hands free. Type. Continue to receive the next part. The first autumn after the wedding mission San Jose rang again on a Sunday, and I was not there to serve as furniture. I sat instead at my own table with a plate of eggs, cumin sweet, a stack of hot tortillas, and a letter I had begun to write to my younger self in the margin of the newspaper. You will not believe how long you spend trying to be the good woman in somebody else's story. You will learn to be the true woman in your own. The door knocked. I let it knock once more, then opened it to Clara and Mateo, both of them holding grocery bags that were heavy. In a way I recognized meat beans, tomatoes, oil flour, not gifts, but ingredients. They went to the counter without waiting for an invitation. Clara rolled dough circle by circle, and Mateo chopped onions without flinching when the knife slid. Their voices were softer than they had been in years. We ate, and after the plates were clean, they stood. Mateo said there is still more fence on the other side of the yard, and he would come on Saturday. Instead of saying thank you with the bright false smile women learn to give like spare change, I said yes, and I meant it, and I let the quiet stand. I took the bus into town the next day, not because I needed its utility, but because I wanted to sit among other people and be a person. I watched a grandfather teach his grandson the names of streets. I watched a woman give up her seat without rolling her eyes. I got off near the market and bought a single mango and ate it leaning over the curb, laughing at the juice. In the afternoon, I hauled the old sewing machine to the back room and made space for the new one on the desk where the deeds hang. I threaded it and sewed a line for no reason other than to watch the stitch take. The hum lifted into the room like a small airplane. Joy is quiet and insistent that way. Clara kept Wednesdays. On the fourth one, she brought a paper bag of cash that smelled like restaurant fryer and handed it to me. Rent for October, she said, and I almost corrected her before I remembered she had meant the storage unit in my name where we had kept her boxes and his tools all those years. I took it not because I need penny accounting to feel equal, but because rules are love-wearing boots. On a Sunday evening in November, after Mass let out and the plaza had emptied of pigeons, she called to say there was a special at the mission for elder parishioners, free rosaries, hot champurrado, and would I like to go with her? The question held no assumption. I said no, because I wanted to watch the sky bruise and drink my coffee on the porch, and she said good and joy, and I knew then the repair was real. Love that does not punish a boundary has learned more than an apology can say. I don't pretend our story braided itself into perfection. There are days when impatience still starts a sentence in Mateo's mouth, and days when Clara's shame reaches for the old rope and asks me to pull. There are days when the ledger opens itself in my mind and I have to close it with both hands. But the house is mine and the rules hold. The roses climb, the fence stands, the pension lands and no longer melts. My sister leaves tamales at my door and steals my apron. The sewing machine hums and does not complain about who the work is for, because sometimes the work is for no one. I keep the keys organized and the deeds dusty behind glass. Once at dusk, I walked to the mission and listened for the bells and allowed myself to remember that I had once kept a family standing with nothing but grit and a machine on a table. I did not cry. I did not forgive the first insult or the 100th. I forgave myself for waiting so long to step away. If any of this has taught me anything worth saying out loud, it is that kindness without boundaries is not kindness. It is currency that will always devalue, and that respect is a rent you must charge, even to the people you love, especially to them. A mother's love is not a blank check. A daughter's duty is not obedience, it is truth spoken and accepted. The life I have now fits in my hands not because it is small, but because it is mine. If this story helped you breathe easier or stand taller, tap like subscribe for more chapters of quiet courage and share it with someone who needs permission to set their own terms.